What if every time you traveled through time, you weren't actually changing the past? You were just hopping into a parallel universe where things were already different. Welcome to What If Horizons, where we explore the impossible until it starts making sense. Today, we're diving into the mind-bending idea that time travel might just be parallel universe tourism in disguise. Think about it. You've seen the movies. Someone goes back in time, steps on a butterfly, and suddenly Hitler wins World War II. But what if that's not how it works? What if every time you mess with the past, you're not actually changing your own timeline? You're just jumping into a different universe where Hitler already won, and your old timeline is still out there somewhere, perfectly intact. Let's break it down. Imagine you're a time traveler. You hop into your fancy DeLorean or phone booth or whatever, and you decide to go back to 1955. You arrive, and everything looks great. The cars are shiny, the music is groovy, and everyone's wearing hats for some reason. But here's the twist. This isn't your 1955. This is a parallel universe's 1955. It's almost identical to yours, but it's not the same. So you do what all time travelers do, you meddle. Maybe you stop your parents from meeting, or you invest in Apple, or you tell your younger self to stop eating so much junk food. And then you return to what you think is your present. But surprise, it's not your present. It's the present of the parallel universe you just created. Your original timeline, untouched. Your younger self, still eating junk food. This raises some interesting questions. First, if time travel is just universe hopping, does that mean there's an infinite number of parallel universes out there? Are there universes where dinosaurs never went extinct? Where Napoleon invented the iPhone? Where pineapple on pizza is universally accepted as the superior topping? Second, if you're not actually changing anything in your own timeline, what's the point? You could spend your whole life jumping between universes, trying to fix things, and your original world would stay exactly the same. You're not a hero, you're just a tourist. And let's not forget the ethical implications. If you're jumping into parallel universes, are you responsible for what happens there? If you accidentally cause a nuclear war in universe number 472, is that on you? Or does it not matter because, hey, it's not your universe? Here's the kicker. What if we've already been doing this without realizing it? Ever had a moment where you swear something was different, but everyone else insists it's always been that way? Maybe you didn't misremember. Maybe you just slipped into a parallel universe where things were slightly different. So next time you think about time travel, consider this. You might not be changing the past. You might just be jumping into a parallel world where the past was already different. And who knows, maybe in one of those universes, someone's already figured out how to make time. Now let's imagine how this would actually work in practice. You wake up one morning, stumble into your kitchen, and find a note from yourself saying, "Don't toast the bagel." Naturally, you ignore it, because when has future you ever been right about anything? You pop that bagel in the toaster and suddenly, you're in a world where breakfast foods are sentient and bagels have unionized. This is the fundamental problem with dimension-hopping time travel. The warning signs are always there, but human nature dictates we'll ignore them every single time. Your future self could show up covered in bees screaming, "We made a terrible mistake," and you'd still be like, "But what if I just tweak the settings a little?" The mechanics get even weirder when you consider how minor decisions create branching realities. That time you almost called in sick to work but went anyway. There's a universe where you stayed home and discovered your cat was secretly running an underground poker ring. The afternoon you chose tea instead of coffee. Alternate you is now leading a caffeine-free revolution against the espresso industrial complex. What's truly terrifying is how many near misses we've probably already had. That power outage last Tuesday. Definitely a timeline where someone invented self-aware toasters and they staged a coup. The glitch in your GPS that took you on that weird detour. You narrowly avoided merging into a dimension where traffic laws are decided by rock paper scissors tournaments. The most unsettling part, if this theory is correct, there's already a version of you who figured all this out years ago. They're probably living their best life in a paradise dimension while you're still stuck here listening podcast on YouTube. Rude, honestly. Let's talk about the practical implications for historians if time travel was just universe hopping. Imagine their horror when they realize every history book is simultaneously completely accurate and utterly wrong. That famous battle where the underdog won against impossible odds. Turns out in most universes they got crushed. We just happen to live in the one lucky timeline where things worked out. Archaeologists would have existential crises daily, digging up ancient ruins only to find notes from future anthropologists saying, "You guys got this all wrong. The pyramids were actually giant cat toys." Museums would become surreal places where exhibits change when no one's looking. One day it's a dinosaur skeleton, next day it's a plaque reading, "Sorry, the T-Rex is currently ruling a small European principality in this timeline." The scientific community wouldn't fare much better. Physics labs would post disclaimers. Today's gravity constant, 9.81 meters per square second, subject to change without notice. Astronomy departments would need to update star charts weekly as constellations shift between realities. Imagine the panic when half the periodic table disappears because some time traveler in an alternate world prevented its discovery. Even our personal histories would become unreliable. That embarrassing childhood memory you've been trying to forget. In most universes it never happened, but you're stuck in the one where it did. Your family photo albums would become works of fiction, with pictures subtly changing to match whichever timeline you're currently occupying. One day you're an only child, next day you've got 3 siblings no one remembers. The most disturbing part, there's probably a universe where history went exactly as you learned it in school. And everyone there thinks we're the weird ones. Now let's consider how this would affect relationships. Imagine proposing to your partner, only for them to respond with, "Which timeline's version of me are you asking?" Suddenly every argument about who forgot the anniversary gets infinitely more complicated. That wasn't me, that was alternate universe me who can't remember dates. I would never forget our special day, probably. Dating apps would need major upgrades. Instead of swiping left or right, you'd need to specify which dimensional variants you're open to meeting. Looking for someone between universe number 4729 and number 5193, no time travelers who've caused paradoxes please. First dates would become interrogation sessions. So how many versions of us are married in other realities? And more importantly, how many are happily married? Family gatherings would turn into logistical nightmares. Your parents keep switching between versions who remember your childhood completely differently. 1 minute mom's recalling your perfect piano recital, the next she's staring blankly when you mention it because in this timeline you never took lessons. Thanksgiving dinner becomes a minefield of conflicting memories and alternate histories. Even pets wouldn't be immune. Your dog might suddenly develop memories of a timeline where you fed him steak every day, and now gives you judgmental looks when you serve kibble. Cats would absolutely use this to their advantage. In 83% of parallel universes, I get tuna right now, and who could prove them wrong? The silver lining, every bad breakup has a universe where it worked out. Of course, that also means every happy relationship has a universe where it crashed and burned. Maybe some things are better left unexplored. Let's examine how this would revolutionize the travel industry. Airlines would advertise, visit not just new places, but new versions of reality. With disclaimers in fine print. Cannot guarantee which Paris you'll arrive in. Check if the Eiffel Tower is still standing before departure. Hotel booking sites would need new filters. Show only accommodations where the laws of physics are consistently enforced. Passport control would become a nightmare. Purpose of your interdimensional visit. Business or pleasure. And have you ever been convicted of crimes in any other reality? Customs forms would need extra pages for declaring items that don't exist in this timeline. Try explaining why you're carrying a perfectly ordinary glow-in-the-dark koala without sounding insane. Tour guides would have to be experts in multiple histories. On your left, the White House, or what's left of it in this reality. Fun fact. In 37% of timelines, the British won the War of 1812 and this is actually a very posh tea house. Museums would offer, compare and contrast, tours showing artifacts from different dimensions side by side. The most chaotic would be travel review sites. 1 star, Venice was underwater when we arrived. Again. Or, beware, in this version of Hawaii the volcanoes are sentient and very opinionated about tourism. And imagine the poor souls who accidentally vacation in a reality where their favorite chain restaurant never existed. There was no Olive Garden in this timeline and frankly we weren't prepared for that emotional trauma. Business travelers would face unique challenges. You could arrive for an important meeting only to discover in this universe your company went bankrupt years ago. Or worse, you're the CEO and everyone expects you to know what's going on. Pro tip: always carry documentation proving which dimension you're from. And maybe a spare identity. Now let's explore how this would impact the entertainment industry. Movie studios would have to release multiple versions of every film to account for different timelines. Imagine walking into a theater and getting the version of Star Wars where Jar Jar Binks is the main character. Or worse, the one where the Death Star was actually a giant space spa that got misunderstood. Actors would have to navigate their alternate careers. Imagine Tom Hanks showing up to work only to discover in this reality he's known primarily for his interpretive dance performances. Meryl Streep would have to check which Oscars she's won in this timeline before giving interviews. Best Actress for The Iron Lady. Oh, in this universe I was in The Aluminum Lady, completely different film. Music would become a logistical nightmare. Bands would have to learn multiple versions of their hits based on which timeline they're performing in. Imagine the Rolling Stones trying to remember if in this reality, I Can't Get No Satisfaction was a protest anthem or a jingle for a digestive biscuit company. Video game developers would face unique challenges. Imagine releasing a historically accurate game only to have players from different realities complain it's all wrong. In my timeline, Napoleon won at Waterloo and then opened a chain of successful bakeries. Why isn't that represented here? The most awkward would be reality TV shows. Keeping Up with the Kardashians would need disclaimers about which version of the family viewers are following. This week, Kylie launches her new makeup line in a universe where lip gloss hasn't been invented yet. And imagine the chaos if someone accidentally aired an episode from a timeline where the family are actually a group of highly trained spies. Now let's consider the legal implications of dimension-hopping time travel. Courts would need entirely new categories of law to handle cases where the defendant claims, "That wasn't me, it was my alternate timeline self." Imagine trying to prosecute someone for a crime they haven't committed yet in this reality, but did commit in 3 others. Lawyers would have field days with reasonable doubt. Your Honor, while my client did rob that bank in 72% of observable timelines, in this particular universe he was busy learning the violin. Juries would need specialized training to evaluate evidence that might change depending on which version of reality they're currently experiencing. Intellectual property law would become a nightmare. Patent offices would be flooded with applications from alternate versions of inventors. I'd like to copyright the light bulb. Again, Mr. Edison, this is the 17th version of you this month. Companies would have to trademark their products across thousands of potential realities. Criminal investigations would require temporal forensics. Detectives would have to determine not just who committed the crime, but which timeline's version of them did it. According to our calculations, the murderer is 60% likely to be from a universe where mustaches are mandatory for all government employees. The most absurd cases would involve people suing their alternate selves. I'm seeking damages from version number 429 of myself for giving me his terrible fashion sense. Or worse, people trying to collect on life insurance policies for versions of themselves that died in other realities. Just because I'm alive here doesn't mean I didn't suffer emotional distress from seeing myself get hit by that bus in timeline number 783. Let's dive into how this would affect education. Schools would need to teach alternate history as a core subject. Imagine children learning about the American Revolution from multiple perspectives. The version where the British won, the one where France mediated a peace treaty, and the timeline where the founding fathers were actually alien diplomats. Textbooks would come with version control updates. Please note, as of last Tuesday, the discovery of electricity now belongs to Nikola Tesla in 87% of observable realities. The Benjamin Franklin chapter has been moved to the Alternative Facts appendix. Teachers would have to start every lesson with, "In this timeline." To avoid confusion, exams would become a logistical nightmare. Question 1. Describe the causes of World War I in at least 3 different realities. Bonus points if you can explain how a sentient sandwich influenced the outcome in timeline number 4729. Students would have to cite which version of history they're referencing in their essays. Universities would offer degrees in comparative reality studies and interdimensional physics. Imagine writing a thesis paper that has to account for all known variations of your topic across multiple timelines. The impact of climate change in 72 parallel universes. A meta-analysis of reality shifts from 2000 to 2020. The most chaotic would be parent-teacher conferences. Yes, Mrs. Smith, your son is failing math in this timeline. but in 14 other realities he's a mathematical genius. Perhaps we could arrange a dimensional transfer. And imagine the poor guidance counselors trying to help students choose careers when their future selves might already be doing completely different jobs in other realities. Now let's examine how this would transform healthcare. Doctors would need to first determine which version of their patient they're treating. According to your medical records across 12 observable timelines, you're allergic to penicillin in 58% of realities. Let's do a quick test to see which one we're dealing with today. Hospitals would require dimensional triage systems. Emergency rooms would post signs like, "If you're experiencing chest pain and remember a timeline where heart disease was cured in 1997, please proceed to Reality Adjustment Wing B." Pharmacies would stock alternate versions of medications. This is the aspirin from the universe where side effects include temporary telepathy. Medical research would face unprecedented challenges. Scientists might discover a miracle cure, only to realize it only works in realities where the laws of biochemistry are slightly different. Clinical trials would need to account for patients potentially shifting between timelines mid-study. Subject number 42 initially responded well to treatment, but then recalled being from a universe where placebo effects are reversed. Mental health professionals would need entirely new approaches. Therapists would have to determine whether a patient's anxiety stems from actual problems or memories of worse timelines. I understand you're worried about nuclear war, but in our current reality, world leaders settled their differences through competitive baking shows back in 2018. The most bizarre cases would involve people seeking treatment for conditions they only have in other realities. "Doctor, I keep having flashbacks to a timeline where I died in a Zeppelin accident. Also my phantom limbs hurt. The ones I have in universe number 6291. Insurance companies would go bankrupt trying to determine which pre-existing conditions from which timelines they actually need to cover. Finally, let's consider the philosophical implications. If every possible reality exists somewhere, does anything truly matter? On one hand, there's comfort knowing somewhere out there is a version of you who made all the right choices. On the other hand, there's also a version who somehow made even worse mistakes than you thought possible. Ethicists would debate whether we're responsible for actions our other selves commit. Should you feel guilty about something you did in a different timeline? Can you take credit for accomplishments achieved by alternate versions of you? Religions would splinter over whether souls travel between realities or if each version gets its own. The concept of identity would become fluid. Are you the same person if most of your memories come from different timelines? How much can reality shift before you become someone else entirely? Existential crises would become so common they'd have support groups. "Hi, I'm Dave, and I'm not sure which timeline's Dave I am today." Perhaps the most profound realization is that free will might be an illusion. If every possible decision plays out somewhere, are we really choosing anything? Or are we just experiencing one predetermined path while infinite other versions live out the alternatives? Then again, in some realities that's not true at all. In the end, maybe the only thing we can say for certain is that somewhere out there is a version of this podcast that's much more profound and insightful. Unfortunately, we seem to be stuck with this one. Thanks for listening to What If Horizons, where we ask the questions that create more questions than answers.